"Wipe it off or—" she slapped the maid. But the toddler's next move changed everything. "You think you can humiliate me in front of my own fiancé?" Vanessa's hand cracked across Maria's cheek before anyone could move. The room went silent. Then a small voice, trembling but clear, said, "Mommy, why is the pretty lady crying?" Vanessa froze. She hadn't noticed the 3-year-old standing in the doorway, watching everything. What that little girl did next would unravel a secret Vanessa had spent 2 years hiding, and nothing in that mansion would ever be the same again. Welcome back, friends, to another story full of heartbreak, hope, and the kind of twists that remind us truth always finds a way to the surface. Today's story is about love, loyalty, and a little girl whose innocence becomes the most powerful force in the room. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, which country are you watching from? A single slap can echo louder than any scream. Have you ever watched someone you trusted reveal who they really were in one terrible moment? The Whitfield estate sat on 12 quiet acres outside Charleston, South Carolina, the kind of property where the gardens were trimmed every Tuesday and the silence felt expensive. Daniel Whitfield, 34 years old, had built a logistics empire from a single delivery truck his father once drove. He wasn't born into money. He earned it mile by mile, contract by contract, sleepless night by sleepless night. That history was exactly why he still believed, deep down, that hard work and good character mattered more than what was written on a bank statement. Maria Delgado, 29, had worked in the Whitfield household for almost 2 years. She cooked, she cleaned, she organized Daniel's chaotic schedule better than any assistant he'd ever hired. But more than that, she had a quiet dignity about her that made the house feel less like a museum and more like a home. Her daughter, Sophia, just 3 years old, often sat in the corner of the kitchen with crayons while her mother worked, humming little songs to herself, oblivious to the tension simmering above her head. Vanessa Cole, 28, was Daniel's fiancée. She was beautiful in the way magazine covers are beautiful. Polished, symmetrical, untouchable. She'd met Daniel at a charity gala 14 months ago, and within weeks she had positioned herself as the perfect partner. Supportive at his side during board meetings, radiant beside him at galas, endlessly patient, in public, with his demanding schedule. Daniel believed he had found a woman who understood the weight of his world. What he didn't know was that Vanessa had done her research long before that gala. She knew his net worth before she knew his middle name. She'd dated wealthy men before, men who eventually saw through her, who grew tired of the way she flinched at modest restaurants or grew cold around anyone who couldn't help her socially. Daniel was different. Daniel was generous, trusting, and a little lonely since his mother passed 3 years earlier. He was, in Vanessa's calculations, exactly the kind of man who could be managed. Would you trust someone who seemed perfect in every way? Or would something in your gut tell you to look closer? Maria noticed things Daniel didn't. She noticed how Vanessa's smile tightened whenever Daniel mentioned donating to the children's hospital downtown. She noticed how Vanessa redirected conversations toward real estate, toward investment opportunities, toward subtle questions about the prenup Daniel's lawyer kept delaying. Maria said nothing. It wasn't her place, and she needed this job. Sophia's father had left when she was an infant, and this position, with its steady pay and Daniel's unusual kindness toward his staff, was the most stable thing in their lives. Daniel treated Maria with a respect Vanessa found baffling. He asked about Sophia's preschool. He remembered Maria's mother was recovering from surgery in Savannah and quietly arranged a hospital consultation through his network without being asked. People who work hard for their families deserve to be seen, he told Vanessa once, when she asked why he bothered. Vanessa had smiled and said something about his big heart, while privately thinking he was far too soft for a man worth 9 figures. The tension between Vanessa and Maria had been building for weeks, but it reached its breaking point on a Thursday afternoon in March. Daniel was in Atlanta for a 3-day business trip. Vanessa had invited 2 friends over for lunch on the terrace, the kind of lunch designed to be photographed and posted, every detail curated for an audience that didn't exist in the room. Maria was setting the table when Sophia, playing nearby, accidentally bumped a serving cart. A crystal vase, imported, expensive, utterly replaceable in Vanessa's actual bank account but treated like a sacred relic in that moment, toppled and shattered against the stone floor. Have you ever watched a small accident become an excuse for something much bigger? Vanessa's friends gasped. Vanessa herself stood frozen for half a second, calculating. This wasn't really about the vase. It was about an audience, about asserting dominance in a house she didn't yet legally own, about a frustration that had been quietly building since the day she realized Daniel trusted his housekeeper's judgment more than her opinions on the wedding budget. Do you have any idea what that cost? Vanessa's voice cut across the terrace, sharp enough that the gardener 200 feet away paused his work. Maria's hands trembled, but her voice stayed steady. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Cole. I'll replace it from my own pay. It was an accident. An accident. Vanessa repeated the word like it tasted bitter. Everything is always an accident with you people. The phrase hung in the air. Maria's friends, Vanessa's friends rather, exchanged an uncomfortable glance. Even they sensed something had shifted into territory that wasn't about a vase anymore. What would you do if you were Maria in that moment? Stay silent to protect your job, or speak up to protect your dignity? Maria knelt down and began gathering the broken pieces, her movements quick and careful, trying to disappear into the task the way she'd learned to disappear into difficult moments her whole life. It was in that posture, kneeling, vulnerable, silent, that Vanessa's frustration finally found its outlet. Get up, Vanessa snapped. Stop groveling, it's pathetic. Maria stood. And that was when Sophia, who had been quietly watching from behind a potted lemon tree near the kitchen door, took a small step forward into the open terrace. Sometimes the people we underestimate the most are the ones who see the clearest truth. Sophia was small for her age, with dark curls Maria braided every morning before dropping her at the preschool 2 blocks from the bus stop. She rarely cried, rarely caused trouble, and had an unusual habit, one Maria found endearing and Daniel found remarkable, of narrating exactly what she observed, without filter, the way only a 3-year-old can. Mommy didn't mean to, Sophia said, her small voice carrying further than anyone expected. The cart bumped it. I saw. The terrace fell quiet. Vanessa's friends turned toward the child with a kind of forced, condescending smile adults often give children they wish would disappear. Have you ever watched a child say something so simple it became the most honest thing in the room? Vanessa's jaw tightened. She hadn't expected an audience this small to complicate things further. That's sweet, honey, she said, her tone syrup-sweet and entirely insincere. But grown-ups are talking. You hit her, Sophia said, pointing at her mother's reddened cheek, which Maria had quickly turned away to hide. I saw you hit her. That's not nice. Mommy says hitting isn't nice. The words landed like a small bomb. Vanessa's friends shifted uncomfortably, suddenly very interested in their iced tea. One of them, a woman named Brooke who had known Vanessa since college, quietly set down her glass and said, Vanessa, did you actually hit her? It was nothing, Vanessa said quickly. A reflex. She startled me. But the damage of a 3-year-old's honesty cannot be undone with adult excuses. Maria, still holding broken crystal in her apron, finally looked up, not at Vanessa but at her daughter, silently willing her to stop, to step back, to let this moment pass the way Maria had let so many moments pass before. Would you have stayed quiet to protect your job, the way Maria tried to? Or would you have wanted your child to speak the truth no matter the cost? What none of them knew, not Vanessa, not her friends, not even Maria fully, was that the household's outdoor security cameras, installed 8 months earlier after a string of package thefts in the neighborhood, covered the terrace in full HD with audio. Daniel had insisted on the system himself, more concerned with protecting his staff's safety during late shifts than with monitoring anyone's behavior. He rarely checked the footage. It existed quietly, an unblinking witness to a house full of people who thought no one was watching. That evening, after Vanessa's friends left and Maria had finished her shift with trembling hands and a face she kept turned slightly away from the world, she sat with Sophia in the small guest cottage behind the main house where they lived. It was modest but warm. Daniel had insisted on renovating it properly when Maria started, refusing to let an employee live in anything less than comfortable conditions. "Mommy," Sophia asked, climbing into her lap, "why was the lady mean to you?" Maria held her daughter close, fighting back tears she'd been suppressing for hours. "Sometimes people are unkind when they're scared, baby. It's not about you. It's not about me either. Are you gonna tell Mr. Daniel?" Question hung heavy. Maria hadn't decided. Telling Daniel risked her job. Vanessa would surely paint a different story, frame Maria as dramatic or dishonest, and Daniel, blinded by months of curated affection, might believe the woman he was about to marry over the housekeeper who cleaned his floors. But staying silent meant accepting that this was simply how things were, that her daughter would grow up watching her mother absorb cruelty without consequence. Do you think money and status can convince people to overlook the truth, even when it's right in front of them? 3 days later, Daniel returned from Atlanta in good spirits. His trip more successful than expected, already planning a celebratory dinner. He noticed immediately that Maria seemed distant, her usual warmth replaced by careful, guarded politeness. He noticed Sophia clinging to her mother's leg more than usual when he greeted them in the kitchen. "Is everything all right?" he asked Maria directly, the kind of question that demanded honesty simply by the sincerity behind it. Maria hesitated. Vanessa, who had been listening from the hallway, appeared in the doorway with a bright smile already prepared. "Everything's wonderful, isn't it, Maria? We had a lovely lunch while you were away." It was a test, and Maria understood it instantly, a silent warning disguised as a friendly statement. Confirm the lie or risk everything. Maria looked at Daniel, then at her daughter standing quietly beside her, watching with the unfiltered attentiveness only children possess, and something inside her steadied. "Actually, Mr. Whitfield," Maria said quietly, "there's something you should know. Truth has a way of arriving exactly when we least expect it, and exactly when we need it most." Daniel's expression shifted from confusion to concern as Maria recounted the events of that Thursday afternoon. The vase, the harsh words, the slap. She spoke carefully, without exaggeration, the way someone speaks when they've rehearsed restraint rather than rage. Vanessa, still standing in the doorway, felt the temperature of the room change. "That's not what happened," Vanessa interrupted, her voice climbing toward panic disguised as outrage. "She's exaggerating. I barely touched her, it was an accident, a reflex." "I saw," Sophia said again, stepping forward with the same plain honesty she'd offered on the terrace. "She hit Mommy's face. Hard. Mommy's face was red after." Have you ever watched an adult's carefully built story collapse under the weight of a child's simple truth? Daniel looked between the three of them. His fiancée, flushed and defensive. His housekeeper, quiet and steady despite clear discomfort, and a 3-year-old who had no reason to lie and no understanding of the stakes involved in telling the truth. Something cold settled in his chest, a feeling he recognized from boardrooms when a deal was about to fall apart. "I have security footage of the terrace," Daniel said slowly. "I haven't checked it in months. But if you're telling me nothing happened, Vanessa, you won't mind if I do." Vanessa's confident posture faltered for the first time since Daniel had known her. "Daniel, this is ridiculous. You're going to take the word of the help over mine." The phrase, "the help," landed in the room like a struck match. Daniel had heard Vanessa use careless language before, small comments he'd excused as exhaustion or stress. But hearing it now, in front of Maria, in front of Sophia, stripped away whatever remaining benefit of the doubt he'd been extending. What would you do if you were in his place, choosing between the partner you were about to marry and the truth standing right in front of you? Daniel walked to the study without another word, Vanessa trailing behind him, pleading, her voice losing its polish with every step. He pulled up the security system on his laptop, scrolled to Thursday afternoon, and pressed play. The footage was unambiguous. The vase falling. Maria's apology. Vanessa's words, sharper and crueler in audio than even Maria's retelling had suggested. And then the slap, clean and undeniable, caught in crisp resolution. But the footage revealed something else too, something Daniel hadn't anticipated. After Vanessa's friends left that day, the cameras had continued recording, and 2 hours later, alone on the terrace, Vanessa had taken a phone call. Daniel almost closed the laptop, uninterested in eavesdropping further, until a name caught his attention through the audio. His own. He turned the volume up. "He's still dragging his feet on the prenup," Vanessa was saying, pacing near the lemon tree, unaware of the microphone 8 feet above her. "My lawyer says if we can push the wedding up before he finalizes it, the language defaults in my favor under South Carolina law. I just need him distracted for another month, maybe 2. He's been talking about expanding into Charleston real estate. If I can get him excited about a property near my sister's, that should buy us time." Daniel's hands went cold on the keyboard. The twist had arrived, and it changed everything he thought he understood about the woman he was going to marry. What would you have felt, discovering that the person you trusted most had been quietly orchestrating your future for their own gain? He listened to the rest in silence, Vanessa discussing wedding venues not for sentiment but for their proximity to properties she'd researched, mentioning a financial planner who was, it became clear, actually a divorce attorney specializing in prenuptial loopholes, and finally, chillingly, referring to Daniel himself not by name but by a phrase that would stay with him long after. The account. Vanessa appeared in the study doorway, still trying to recover her composure. "Daniel, whatever you think you heard, I can explain." "You called me the account," Daniel said quietly, not looking up from the screen. Vanessa went pale. "For 14 months, Daniel continued, his voice steady in the dangerous way calm voices sometimes are. "I thought I'd finally found someone who loved me before she loved what I had. I introduced you to my late mother's friends. I let you redecorate her favorite rooms. And this whole time, you were planning a timeline to lock in money before I could protect myself legally." "That's not fair," Vanessa said, tears appearing with suspicious speed. "Relationships are complicated, Daniel. Money is part of any serious commitment." "Don't," Daniel said, holding up a hand. "Don't turn this into something it isn't. You hit a woman who has shown me more genuine loyalty in 2 years than you have in 14 months. And you did it because she witnessed an accident you decided to punish." Outside the study, unnoticed by either of them, Maria stood frozen in the hallway with Sophia's small hand in hers. Having heard enough through the partially open door to understand that the truth, finally, had found its way to the surface. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is simply refuse to disappear. The days following that confrontation moved with a strange, suspended quality. The way time feels different after an earthquake. Everyone still standing, but nothing quite steady underfoot. Vanessa left the estate that same evening, her belongings packed by a moving service Daniel arranged within hours. Her engagement ring left on the entryway table without ceremony or argument. The fight had gone out of her once she understood there was no version of events Daniel would believe over what he'd heard in her own voice. Daniel didn't celebrate. He sat for a long time in his study that night, replaying not just the footage but the entirety of the relationship through a new, painful clarity. He thought about every moment he'd mistaken performance for partnership, every gesture he'd interpreted as love that had actually been strategy. Have you ever had to re-examine an entire relationship once you learned the truth behind it? Maria, for her part, expected the worst in the days that followed. In her experience, when wealthy households fell into chaos, it was rarely the wealthy who absorbed the consequences. She quietly began updating her resume, assuming Daniel's grief and embarrassment over the broken engagement would eventually translate into distance, perhaps even resentment toward the woman who had been present for his humiliation. Instead, 3 days after Vanessa's departure, Daniel found Maria in the kitchen during her morning shift and asked if they could talk. "I owe you an apology," he said before she could speak. "Not for Vanessa's behavior, that's hers to answer for, but for not seeing what was happening sooner. For not asking you directly if something was wrong, instead of needing my own daughter, who isn't even my daughter, to tell me the truth through her honesty." Maria, caught off guard, didn't know how to respond. In 2 years working in wealthy households, she'd rarely heard an employer acknowledge fault so plainly. "You don't owe me anything, Mr. Whitfield," she said carefully. "I should have told you myself sooner." "Why didn't you?" The question was gentle, but it required an honest answer. "Because people like me learn that speaking up against people like her rarely ends well for us," Maria said quietly. "I needed this job. Sophia needed stability. I couldn't risk it on the chance you'd believe me over your fiancé. Would you have made the same calculation, weighing your dignity against your family's stability?" Daniel sat with that for a long moment, the weight of it settling somewhere uncomfortable. "That's going to change," he finally said. "Not just for you, for how this household treats everyone who works here. I built this company believing people who work hard deserve respect regardless of their title. I let that principle slip somewhere along the way, and I'm sorry." What followed in the weeks ahead surprised everyone, including Daniel himself. He established a formal review of staff treatment across all his properties, implemented clear channels for employees to report concerns without fear of retaliation, and quietly increased wages across the household staff to reflect what he called actual gratitude, not performative kindness. But the more significant shift was smaller, quieter, and entirely unplanned. Daniel began spending more time in the kitchen in the evenings, ostensibly checking on dinner preparations but really just enjoying the unguarded warmth of Maria and Sophia's company. A warmth that had nothing to do with galas or photographs or carefully managed appearances. Sophia, who had taken an immediate liking to Daniel since the day he'd remembered her favorite color was purple, began leaving small drawings on his study desk. Stick figures labeled Mommy, Sophia, and increasingly, Mr. Daniel, holding hands in crayon beneath a yellow sun. "Have you noticed how the smallest gestures sometimes reveal the deepest truths about where we belong?" Maria resisted what was happening for longer than Daniel did, painfully aware of how easily this could be misread, how quickly gossip could turn a genuine connection into something cynical and transactional in others' eyes. Exactly the kind of relationship Vanessa had been running all along. She kept her distance professionally, declined Daniel's invitations to join family dinners, insisted on maintaining the boundaries of employer and employee, even as those boundaries grew increasingly difficult to justify. It was Sophia, once again, who broke through what the adults around her couldn't quite say. "Mr. Daniel," she asked one evening, perched on a kitchen stool while Daniel helped her with a puzzle, "are you gonna marry Mommy?" The question landed in the kitchen like a dropped plate. Maria nearly choked on the water she was drinking. Daniel, to his credit, didn't laugh the question off or deflect with practiced charm. "I don't know, sweetheart," he said honestly, glancing at Maria, whose face had gone the particular shade of red reserved for moments of complete exposure. "That's a question for grown-ups to figure out slowly. But I'll tell you this, your mom is one of the most honest, hard-working, good-hearted people I've ever known. And so are you." What would you have said in that moment, caught between professional caution and undeniable feeling? Some endings don't arrive with fireworks. They arrive quietly, built from 100 small moments of honesty finally allowed to breathe. 6 months passed. The estate, once a stage for Vanessa's curated performances, slowly transformed into something that actually resembled a home. Daniel finalized the divorce of his business from several toxic partnerships Vanessa had quietly steered him toward, discovering in the process that 2 investment opportunities she'd championed were tied to her own family's struggling real estate ventures. Confirmation, if any more was needed, of how thoroughly calculated her affection had been. Vanessa, for her part, attempted to salvage her reputation through a carefully worded interview with a local lifestyle magazine, painting herself as a misunderstood woman who'd simply been overwhelmed by stress. The article gained little traction once readers discovered, through Charleston's small but talkative social circles, the truth behind the broken engagement. Some consequences don't arrive through punishment. They arrive through the quiet erosion of trust that follows a person who built their life on dishonesty. Have you noticed how the truth, once revealed, tends to find its way into every corner eventually? Maria's life, meanwhile, had changed in ways she could never have predicted on that terrible Thursday afternoon when a vase shattered and everything else slowly followed. She'd been promoted, informally at first and then formally, into managing the household's daily operations, a role that came with genuine respect, fair compensation, and something she'd rarely experienced in her professional life, being asked her opinion and having it actually matter. But the deeper change was the one that had nothing to do with titles or salaries. Daniel had been patient, careful, never pushing past the boundaries Maria needed to feel safe. Their relationship grew slowly, built not on galas or grand gestures but on shared dinners in the kitchen, on Daniel learning to braid Sophia's hair badly enough that they both laughed about it, on quiet evenings where conversation flowed easily because neither of them was performing for the other. "I used to think love had to look impressive to be real," Daniel told Maria one evening on the same terrace where everything had unraveled, now repainted and replanted, the broken vase long replaced by something simpler and far less expensive. "Vanessa taught me that impressive and real are sometimes opposites." Maria smiled, watching Sophia chase fireflies across the lawn in the fading light. "I used to think love wasn't something available to people like me, not with someone like you. Too much distance. Too much risk. And now I think the people who deserve trust are the ones who earn it quietly, every day when no one's watching," Maria said. "Not the ones who perform it loudest when everyone is." What lesson do you think this story is really trying to teach us about the difference between performed love and real love? A year after the slap that changed everything, Daniel and Maria married in a small ceremony in the same garden where Sophia had once stepped forward from behind a lemon tree to speak an uncomfortable truth. There were no magazine photographers, no curated guest list designed for social capital, just close friends, a few trusted staff members who had become something closer to family, and a 3-year-old, now 4, serving as the most important member of the wedding party. Flower girl, truth teller, and the small voice that had started it all. As Daniel watched Sophia toss flower petals down the aisle with fierce concentration, he thought about how strange it was that the most important revelation of his adult life had come not from a lawyer, not from a business partner, not from years of careful observation, but from a child too young to understand the stakes of honesty, and too honest to understand why anyone would ever choose to hide the truth. Maria, walking toward him in a simple ivory dress, free for the first time in years of the careful self-protection she'd learned to wear like armor, understood something too. That dignity, once it survives a moment of public humiliation, often grows stronger rather than smaller. That the people who try to crush us with cruelty sometimes hand us, without meaning to, the very platform from which our truth finally gets heard. Greed, dishonesty, and manipulation may build impressive facades, but they rarely survive contact with simple, stubborn truth. Vanessa had spent 14 months constructing a perfect performance of love, and lost everything the moment a 3-year-old said 4 honest words. "I saw you hit her." What do you think? Was Sophia's honesty a coincidence? Or do you believe children often see the truths adults are too afraid to say out loud? If this story moved you, give it a like and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Subscribe for more stories about love, honesty, and the quiet courage it takes to tell the truth even when it costs us something. And if you know someone who needs a reminder that integrity always finds its way to the light, share this story with them today.